Hello. How's it going, guys? Today I want to talk about magic again. It's my thing, isn't it? I want to talk about three types of magic because I recently was studying alchemy, specifically the alchemist Thomas Vaughan, who he did this thing here, which you can see. It's called the Invisible Mountain. This is one of the only glyphs he ever what would you call it? He ever transcribed in one of his books. He's an interesting alchemist. Welsh alchemist, so he lived in Britain, member of the Royal Society before it was infected by skeptics. But besides that, he was also the guy who translated the original Rosicrucian manifestos into English. So he's a really interesting person. Thomas Vaughan. He also had a wife, Rebecca Vaughan, who in his notebook apparently he transcribed and said, "She is a greater alchemist than I." So very interesting thing, very interesting alchemist. But I was researching him, and he had a very interesting dream. And in this dream, he describes he's in like a forest, kind of like Dante in the beginning of the Inferno. He's lost in a forest, and then he finds his way into a temple, an underground temple, and he meets a woman in a green dress. So very interesting, the divine feminine, and she's called Talia. Apparently Talia is a Greek muse. But so he meets this woman named Talia, and she kind of shows him around. She shows him these funky things. Like there's one bit where she shows him these these mountains of mystery or something. And then he looks at them and he realizes they're made of salt, which is very alchemical if you know anything about alchemy. And then there's like a waterfall in between the two mountains. And he describes it as it shone like pearl, but it was translucent like crystal. And he realizes the waters were out of the prima materia. And I was like, ooh. But he had this awesome dream. And in the dream, Talia tells him something about magic. She basically says there are three types of magic. And she calls them something, but I'll say there's elemental magic, astral magic or astrological magic, and then there's theurgy, basically. And she says these are three types of magic. And because they don't work anymore because people do them separately. And she gives this example of if you walk into a house and you see a bunch of limbs on the floor, what would you think? Would you think that thing is living? Obviously not. But if you assembled the limbs together into a body, and then it's something moving that can think, and that's something that lives. So you can't separate things and hope that they work. So she says that the problem with magic is it used to be this one art that has been separated. And so you need to do all three at the same time. And the ways that they describe this was very, very interesting. So the first magic is terrestrial magic, or what I said was elemental magic. And this has an internal and an external factor. So you could say externally, an example of terrestrial magic would be like physical alchemy, like lab alchemy. But an internal version of this work would be like an internal alchemical exercise, or a work with the elementals, or elemental magic, but internal elemental magic. So this is something like, in Franz Barden's book, Initiation into Hermetics, his first book. I'll talk about his three main books. So his first book, he talks about this process of bringing in the different elements outside of yourself into yourself and kind of sealing them into yourself and developing internal, kind of like, like a Chinese Qigong, you move energy into the Dantian, except you move these different types of elements into different parts of the body. So it's this elemental practice that changes your vibration and makes you a magician. I was like, oh, that's very interesting. And then there's the next one was this astral magic or astrological magic, which you could say externally it is connected with, you could say, certain astrological things. That's the astrological art is the external factor of this. But internally, it's the work with angels and gods, evocation, invocation of deities. So you need to work with something macrocosmically to then influence you. So there's a macrocosmic influence, and you're also working elementals microcosmically within yourself. So there's a macrocosmic influence that affects your microcosm, and you're also affecting it yourself via working with this thing. So it's like you're working with the higher and the lower at the same time. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then she says, then there's this other part, which she calls spiritual magic or sacred magic, which is basically theurgy, which is to connect to the higher genius or the active intellect or the holy guardian angel. As Gurdjieff, he would say something like, the higher cylinders in you. But these higher functions, we all have higher functions in us, but we're not connected to them. And we're so used to using our three-dimensional senses that if we were to gain the activity of these higher centers or to connect with the functions, we would psychologically automatically externalize them and perceive them as something outside of ourselves. So that's why they call it something like the knowledge and communion with the holy guardian angel. It's like, yeah, we see it as a guardian angel, but it's actually a part of us. It's just the higher us that's like extrapolated to outside. So we want to commune with this thing, this internal thing inside of us. And it was really interesting because I also read that part in the Picatrix recently, which if anybody's read, Picatrix is just a grimoire of like, weird magic. But it's one of the original ones, so it has a big influence in the West, etc., etc. But it's, book 3, chapter 6, I believe, is the one that everyone reads. So I read that, and it's like this dialogue with someone asking like Hermes Trismegistus about how do you know so much stuff? And Hermes is like, oh, you want to know a bunch of stuff? Here's what you got to do. You got to find like a hole, and you got to sit at the hole and move down into this abyss. And when you move down, there'll be great winds. And he says you've got to get a light so that you can go down and you can see into the abyss. But there is these great winds that will, knock out your light, that will blow out your candle. So you need to create glass to seal your candle, your flame. Oh shit! To seal your flame like a lantern, so that when you bring it down, the winds won't affect it. And then Jesus Christ. And then when you reach a low enough level in this abyss, you will see an image. And at the obtaining of this image, the winds will die down. They will fall silent, and you'll be able to dig into the four corners of the hole. And there's this, he gave this description, and I was blown away because I'm like, oh my God, that's internal introversion. That's meditation. You're going deep into yourself. Your thoughts are continuously there, but they keep on blowing out the strength of your conscious concentration. But then as you continuously go deeper and deeper, and you learn certain techniques, you refine some glass, and you're able to hold your consciousness, that little flame, deep enough that it goes and you're able to apprehend something. You're able to connect to something real, an image there written in the astral light. Once you obtain that, then the whole thing is that thing is your real guru then. You can do the work without a teacher, but it's near impossible unless you connect to a higher principle, unless you are what the Neoplatonists would call the Theodidactus, which is God taught. So you need to connect to your inner being. You need to connect to Atman, to the Oversoul. And this connection to this solar principle then is able to teach us and guide us, and then perhaps to and this kind of connects to Franz Barton. His first book, Initiation to Hermetics, about elemental magic. The next book, Evocation and Invocation, it's all about celestial hierarchies. And then the next one, Keys to the True Kabbalah, is about connecting with God or whatever, which is that Kabbalistic method. So interesting. It kind of like blew me away. And the key that she gives is you need to do them at the same time, or you should be practicing them or attempting them. Like maybe you need to have 3 practices a day. One elemental practice. Danny, please. You need to have an elemental practice for your magician state, and then you need to have a kind of a more celestial astrological practice, working with the stars for the other side of that, the ceremonial magician side of things. And then you finally need to become a mystic as well. You need to be a mystic. Go deep inside yourself and commune with that thing. All of those things together make each part work. Something is missing, and it's actually doing all 3 at the same time that actually makes it all real. And that just, so that just kind of blew me away. And then I just kind of saw this image from Thomas Vaughan as well. It's called The Invisible Mountain, and it's got some interesting images in it. So there's this mountain, obviously, that's girded, and you kind of see this black part around it, around everything. And the black part's got these weird creatures in it. So this is us. We're going deep inside ourselves, and we're going deep in the earth. And what do we find? Deep inside ourselves, we find all of our bad memories, all of the times people have abused us, all of these traumas. These are the things which we have to fight to get in closer and deeper. And at our very depth, there's this dragon, which also has gold there. And that's kind of us obtaining the gold. And at first, when we do the work, we're blind, but we're looking for the light. which then illuminates, and there's our holy guardian angel working with us. And this angel then teaches us to climb this mountain, this invisible mountain that no one else can see, but we want to attain it. And at the top is the Philosopher's Stone, which in this case is, maybe it's the Philosopher's Stone. It's the, what do you call it? The grapes. I think he's using a metaphor of viticulture, winemaking in this case, to describe the alchemical process. But it's like at the top there, that's when we kind of reach the creme de la creme. And then up the top, there's the stars, there's the moon, there's the sun. It's a very interesting symbol, and it's very interesting, that theory of working with all three magics at the same time. I just never heard that before, and it kind of blew me away. So I thought I'd give it to you guys. Anyway, the 3 types of magic. There you go. What do you think about that? Tell me in the comments section below. Start working. Do it.